Good evening and welcome to Stones and Thrones. My name is Nicholas A. Venna. This is my show. I analyze and talk about current events in society, culture, and political news in pursuit of the good things to which we can hold fast and build upon, stone by stone, until myself and like-minded individuals have thrones that last. Occasionally, I'll be responding to some stones that have been thrown at me, and sometimes I'll even be throwing some stones of my own. Today is Tuesday, July 22nd. Had a show last night, had some technology issues. Then some of the topics that I went over evolved so quickly in the news, broadened my take on some of them, and so I just scratched the show. So really, this is yesterday's show, revised for this morning. But it is Tuesday, July 22nd, the feast day of St. Mary Magdalene. So, in honor of those truths, there's a number of things I'd like to get to today. The main topics are the arrest and current imprisonment or jailing of the Tate brothers, Andrew and Triston. Apparently they went to a show, or they were going to attend a show, a boxing match or some sort of fighting match. That's what I've heard most recently. And in the process of trying to get into the building to watch this show, they were apprehended and arrested on charges of trafficking and rape, and a list of those types of allegations. It turns out that these allegations go as far back as 10 years ago or more. And naturally, yesterday's timeline on X and in other news platforms is just filled with all of the information and opinions and speculation about what's going on here. So it looks like there was an extradition request from London, the most anti-white, anti-male, anti-Christian, anti-freedom country on the planet right now, certainly in the West. And of course, Andrew and Triston Tate are not even really white or Christian. I think they're Muslim. That's what Ben Shapiro told us. I don't really pay attention to them at all, so this might be common knowledge. So there's my evidence. I don't really follow the Tates. I'm not a big fan. I've seen some of their content. I understand they have done some good in terms of exposing the evils of feminism, which is such a scourge on the planet right now that it sort of tells you the state of things when Muslim polygamist pornographers seem to be offering more value to the culture than many of the people who should be Christians or Catholics or good leaders. So that tells you a little bit about the world today, and that's the reputation that they have. I've never really seen any of that content, to be honest. I think what I've seen is things like Andrew Tate talking about these super expensive exotic cars that he just bought, and that he has a whole bunch of them, or might have like $1 million or $2 million car, and then he'll be like speeding down an empty highway in it, or talking about all the girls that he has, but then the only girls in frame with them look to be, in my estimation, like cheap prostitutes, no one that I would approach even for free. So I always just assumed that his brand was just kind of aging, and maybe there was a golden era that I just missed, a golden age that I just missed, where he stood for something a little more like appealing. But that's it. I don't have a lot of exposure to him, so I can't make any significant judgments about it. But what I can make are some observations about what happened with their extradition request and the two competing sides, which always is very crude and rudimentary, unsophisticated. And that is the quite expected line of like the Ben Shapiro's, where, oh, look, you have your Muslim pornographers. It should be obvious when you know that Shapiro doesn't really care about pornography. He loves it. His own favorite country, Israel, is filled with money from billionaire pornographers that support it. It's a very Zionist thing. You know that he hates Muslims almost entirely, except for the degree to which Muslims hate Catholics. So you can't really take his opinion for anything. Plus, you know, he's a grifter, and he's been nothing but a Zionist shill since he surfaced many moons ago, 25 years ago in college. You also know that he's a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, who shot down legislation in Israel to ban porn by default from ISPs, where you would have had to have made a request. So not a major hurdle, just a very simple, if you want access to pornography, you have to contact your ISP, phone call, email, support ticket, whatever the case may be. And then they just unlock it all for you. So it's just the simple default that when you sign up for your internet service, your ISP blocks and filters this content by default. And you have to be proactive in order to obtain your degenerate porn. So proof that all these allegations of, oh, if you're against Israel, you're anti-Semitic, or the idea that Israel itself is somehow this self-contained, homogenous culture and politique, it's just not. That's not what it's made up of. You have in Israel clearly people who have a better sense about what a just and healthy society could look like than you have in the United States. That was a laudable legislation that they had drafted and got passed in somewhat their form of a lower chamber of Congress. And when it finally made its way up to Bibi, it was vetoed, which is Ben Shapiro's position. So it doesn't matter that he goes out and writes books and tells everybody that he hates pornography because it's a sin and it's against the Ten Commandments that neither himself or any of the other American atheist, communist Jews actually believe in. He's just sort of been a grifter and a blowhard and conservative plant in every regard for everything. And there are Jews in America, groups of rabbis even, who are vehemently opposed to Zionism and actually maintain integrity in their understanding of God and faith and morals. So it's not a homogenous scene, which is why in my last show I tried to make such a clear distinction about when people use the expression today of the Jews, it's very misleading. And the lack of understanding and the level of ignorance in culture and political discourse when you use expressions like the Jews plays into very evil, very disingenuous, very dishonest people's hands so that they can just start lobbing out insults like you're a Nazi and you're an anti-Semite, when in reality, that's just not true at all. In fact, these same people suppress Jewish leaders and Jewish rabbis' voices who don't believe in the things that they believe in. Much in the same way in the Catholic Church, you have massive divisions where one side of the church, and these labels are not actually meaningful or accurate, but this is how people identify them. They call it, liberal and conservative. They use political expressions, which itself is detrimental to the Catholic Church and honest, integral discourse about the state of things and possible solutions or paths forward for what's supposed to be an endeavor to bring about the kingdom of God here on earth. But you do have this political type discourse, and Catholics being referred to as either liberal or conservative, where the conservative Catholic seems to reference people with conservative values that would actually be Christian, and the liberal Catholics is like your rainbow waving, pride parade attending, I'm a priest, but I'm not really celibate because I didn't sacrifice anything because I have a bunch of boyfriends in the seminary and on the Jersey Shore, which is not really Catholic at all. That's basically an antichrist. That's almost like worse than Judas. In some ways, it is worse than Judas. So things are just not as clear as you'd ever want them to be. They are as confusing and disjointed as the worst enemies of the church have designed them to be, and help facilitate a culture to make such a state of things not only possible, but likely. They nurture it and they feed it. And this situation with the Tate brothers is a perfect example of how things work in society that make all that possible. And really, stepping back, all that you're looking at and observing is there are forces for good in the world who are trying to do good, trying to be good, trying to promote the good, which is to the benefit of everybody in society, even bad people. Then you have these elements in society where they're actually evil. They do evil, they promote evil, and they try to facilitate the mass participation in evil, but they disguise it as good and they market it as good. And it's because they have an understanding of what good things are, but they only want those things for themselves. And they want it at the expense and to the detriment and to the prejudice of everybody else, for all different forms of justification, and sometimes for no justification at all. They do it for their race supremacy, for their religious supremacy, and sometimes they're just naked in their admissions that it's not even that deep and it's not even that big. It's just, I don't care about you and I'm willing to use you or even harm you for my own benefit. You see that with Catholics, and you see that in the ordinary rank and file general public now, because that disease has infected the whole world. So you no longer have the, people are generally good, try to be good, try to do good, value good, and would be proactive in suppressing, snuffing out, and extirpating evil from society. You don't have that anymore. Now people will actually promote things that they would admit are evil, and then acknowledge shamelessly that their reason for doing so is because it enables them to take a greater share and greater control of the good things that they enjoy that are here and part of life on planet Earth. So that's the state of things in this story, in this extradition request from London. The refusal of the Trump administration to step in and resist this, and the actual participation of the State Department, whose sign-off is necessary in order to make this happen, which would be Marco Rubio, is kind of concerning. It's a bad look, to say the least. But it opens up a line of discussion and analysis that I think is just perfect, because what is this anyway, if not a game and an effort to try to start opening people's eyes to what's really going on, not to blackpill them, but something kind of like that, only because our options are not what they used to be. So it's not an absolute black pill in the form of why bother, you can't do anything about it, because you have to bother and there are things that you can do about it, but you have to reframe your understanding of what you can actually do about it and what success looks like. And in a way, the real serum, the antidote for a selfishness that manifests and expresses itself to the detriment and harm of society at large, that's rooted in a personal, self-centered selfishness. The anecdote is almost like, or not even almost like, it is precisely the opposite of that, a self-sacrificial disposition where it still takes place within the person and the subjective, what am I doing, but from the form of a willingness and, in an extraordinary sense, which would require divine intervention, an eagerness to self-sacrifice for the benefit of other people and the society at large, which, in a phrase, to make it simple, is love. And the greatest of which is expressed in laying down your life for somebody else. So, but that's not easy. That's essentially impossible given human nature. We are programmed to identify the good with our intellects and to will the good with our will. And our programming was basically broken in the garden with the fall and the original sin, the legal guilt of which was repudiated through baptism if you're a Christian, but the effects of which are still there. So even though God does not hold us in a guilt or in a state of guilt by virtue of being human and descendants of Adam and Eve, that legal repudiation of guilt is lifted through baptism. The effects of original sin, concupiscence, our inclination towards selfishness to the detriment of ourselves, regardless of what our intellects seem to be telling us, but also to the detriment of everybody around us. And so love, in that theological sense, is the answer. The self-sacrifice for the benefit of the other, the greater love of which doesn't exist except for to lay down your life for a friend. So, yeah, not to hyper-spiritualize that or theologize it beyond that which is necessary to make sure that people actually understand the usefulness of these types of stories when you can observe them. So, let me dive right into it. Timeline's filling up. Andrew and Triston Tate, they were arrested due to an extradition request from London for allegations of trafficking and rape and all that kind of stuff that are over 10 years old. Timeline's filling up with all the very reasonable, very expected, very understandable, easy to have anticipated fighting and infighting about the prevalence and pervasiveness of false accusations, which at this stage is off the charts. Anybody who says otherwise is a liar or a feminist. Not that those two things are different, except for the feminist, the real feminist, doesn't feel the need to lie about it to themselves or within their own circles because they're in support of it. They support false accusations. They see it as a form of power. They see it as a form of justice, reparations due to the patriarchy. And so for them, false accusations, they would prefer to not even need to level a false accusation. To them, that's sort of diminutive. It's beneath them to have to even lie about you. Simply because you are male and they are female, they are superior to you, and you are evil and they are good and perfect and sinless. And so they actually hate having to make up a lie. And so they hate the society that they need to lie to, because everybody should just agree with them that all men are subhuman and deserve to suffer and be tortured at the hands of the divine feminine, and so on and so forth. So, properly speaking, it's not really that the feminist is synonymous with the liar, it's just the feminist makes recourse to lies for the purpose of achieving her agenda. Even though she hates doing it, she doesn't hate it because it's wrong. She doesn't even believe it's wrong. She believes the fact that she has to lie in order to harm a man is what's wrong, that there should be no barriers in society and they should be able to inflict harm and torture on men at will without question. Anybody who denies that is lying, and anybody who claims to be a feminist and at the same time claims that that's not their actual disposition is either ignorant or stupid, uninformed, or lying to themselves. Because that's really the whole of it. That's the entire substance of it. There's nothing else to feminism apart from that. Even feminists know there is no equality. And we see that today in the way that they go crazy with wanting to abolish trans male to female athletes from their sports, because they they recognize there is a lack of equality. Even if you pump a male full of estrogen and put all of these sort of like anti-testosterone types of chemicals and treatments on someone, even if you remove their genitals, even the real feminists recognize that they're still disadvantaged in their sports. So they never believed in equality. That was never the agenda of the movement. They don't believe in it today. They don't even believe in egalitarianism. They believe in female supremacy. That's a real feminist, not the idiots that walk around who have no clue what they're talking about or what they're doing. But these things certainly swell up as soon as you have accusations of the type with the Tates, because you have large cohorts who actually believe, oh, they're guilty of these crimes. You have very large groups of people who recognize, oh man, we would never know whether or not they're guilty or innocent precisely because false accusations are so prevalent, and the laws that make it so easy to falsely accuse somebody to such a great detriment and catastrophic effect on the lives of the accused, that there's so much incentive and profit in false accusations. So they just sort of recognize in a very rational way, you'll never know the truth unless there were major mistakes made and some really compelling and irrefutable and universally observable and interpretable evidence that would support the allegations. And then you have the group of people who recognize the allegations could be true or could be false, but who believe that the Tates should be incarcerated and or even executed simply because of their disposition towards women in general, which is categorically misogynistic. So, if anything, the truth about the circumstances here is that the Tates have not helped themselves with their public expressions of misogyny and their views on women and how to treat them. And I don't really agree with any of that. I'm the last person in the world who thinks anything of the supposed, it's not even supposed, the clearly ridiculous notion of the divine feminine. But as a Catholic, I also recognize there are things we could simply not ignore, and God can do what he wants. He made men. He made women. He did establish a natural order. It is clear that the female nature, as it relates to specific things, is the weaker sex, and the male nature is stronger in that regard. That's just the order of creation. That's as clear as it is that any particular male is inferior to another male who is otherwise superior based off the same standards that are applied to expressions such as the weaker sex. And really all of that refers to is from an emotional and intellectual neurological standpoint, and that's by design because of what women are and what they aren't, and the role that they play in the proliferation of the human race, the human species on the planet. So it's not even really that big of a deal. And it's not even really some great benefit to a man, whatever the differences between the sexes are. But it is obvious that male and female are different. And for some reason, that seems to create a lot of conflict in people who usually are just kind of petty to begin with. You have to be petty. You have to be petty to care about the differences. Because if we were to compare ourselves, the human race, to angels with that same paradigm, well, then we would all just be envious and miserable because their creation in the order of nature is so far superior to ours. It would be an embarrassment. It actually benefits us that we have such limited neurological capacities to actually understand the difference between us and angels in our nature. If not for the help of God, We couldn't even tell the difference between an angel and God, even though there actually is an infinite distance. From the perspective of God, the smartest human in the world, when compared to the dumbest human in the world, is almost like indistinguishable. We're so much closer to each other than we are to God. It would be easier to make that comparison between us and an angel. So even the least endowed angel of all, on an intellectual level, compared to the smartest human in the world, is a chasm that is so great, we don't even have the neurological capacity to understand or conceptualize the difference between the two. And I don't mean to run off on too much of a tangent, but here's a good example, okay? The sun is 93 million miles away from Earth, okay? 93 million miles. So from a human perspective, if I was to say to someone the sun is 93,000 miles from the Earth, they still couldn't even really conceive of it. And then if I was to say, oh, I was wrong, it's actually 930,000 miles, it would represent no tangible difference to the human mind. Because as the human mind sits there and tries to even conceptualize something like 9,300 miles, we're limited to like, oh, okay, that's like from the West Coast to the East Coast, and then back again, and then back again, give or take. So that's the way we would conceptualize it. But then if we tried to think about it from an experiential level, like, oh, well, what does that feel like? What's actual knowledge of such a distance? You'd have to traverse that distance in a way that you could actually experience it, which means you couldn't just get on a plane and fall asleep. You couldn't even get on a plane and just endure the travel. You couldn't even do that on a plane looking out a window and trying to process and internalize the material experience of traveling 9,000 miles. Because that's not our day-to-day experience. In an ordinary sense, I am not 30,000 feet up in the air. So when I look at the world from 30,000 feet in the air, I might as well be looking at a picture or a video. There's no experience of it. And I'm in a plane, so even if I could, so the closest thing you could get to it is like a skydiver jumping out of a plane at 30,000 feet in the air. Then at least they could somewhat conceptualize the distance. But at the same time that they're trying to conceptualize that, their senses are being overwhelmed by the experience of having even fallen off a chair. So your entire central nervous system would be going so crazy if you were in a free fall at 30,000 feet, even though you're like kind of just a fraction, a sliver, experiencing the concept of like, oh, I can, with my eyes, maybe see, because I'm no longer just looking at an Earth's curvature that limits my vision to 30 miles. I don't know if you knew that. If you're sitting on the beach, if you're sitting on the sand and you're just looking out at the ocean, that line that you see, your vision terminates basically at 30 miles because the Earth is curved. So the line that you see is just the edge of what you can conceive of. And that's, you're on the ground. So if I'm 30,000 feet in the air and then I'm looking and you just do a little bit of geometry, you can see what I'm saying about conceptualizing a distance, okay? So now just to bring things back into perspective, I'm just talking about 9,300 miles, right? So now imagine trying to conceive of 93,000 miles, let alone 930,000 miles, let alone 9,300,000 miles, and then up to 93 million miles. Okay? So, and that's all in the order of creation. That is only relevant to us. Angels don't have that problem. For them, because they are not made of a material body, there's no elemental makeup to them. Their substance, if you were to try to, map it out in the periodic table of the elements, just isn't there because they're spirit. They're not made of matter. So these are conceptions to them that are like effortless. It's nothing to them. If they wanted to traverse 93 million miles, they could enter into and engage in time, which only exists where there's matter. If there's no matter, there is no time. That's physics. Speed equals distance times time. So distance is related to this point and that point, which is only relevant when there's matter. If there's no matter, then there is no this point and that point, which means there's no time and there's no speed. Okay, so that's eternity. So even physics proves that there is this concept outside of time, and that once you are dealing with a construct in which there is no matter, right, no material, then there is no space, there is no time, there is no speed. Okay, that's eternity. Angels can move in and out of that. We can't conceive of that because we are bound to a material body. So super limited, and that's just hard for us to even conceive of the nature and the order, the section of creation that we exist in right now. So we can't even conceive of things that are here and part of the world that we live in, let alone of the things that are beyond, transcend the world that we're living in. So we're pretty limited. And I just try to like call that to your mind so that when you start thinking about concepts of like the weaker sex or the stronger sex, or the differences between male and female and any form of superiority, and this applies also to like race realism, it's not that big of a deal if you're just like, does one race actually have a higher IQ than another race, where it's not simply a matter of education, but something actually in the genetics of the races would account for the difference. The difference is just minuscule when you think about all of creation. And in the broader context, it's like nothing really to bitch about and cry about, and nor is it anything to brag about. The smartest person in the world, relatively speaking, in the order of creation, like we are the lowest rational creatures. God made rational creatures, and we're the lowest ones. That's our place. So anyway, the ignorance regarding these things plays into the furor and the hysteria that emerges in political and cultural discourse when arrests take place, like what happened with the Tates. So now one thing that I think is notable, because this is one angle, and there's a lot of different angles, and I don't want to go on forever. It's already been 30 minutes, and I'm just barely getting started on this aspect. But there was another story that came through right about the same time, and it's this situation going on with Italy, because there is a man named Lee Mongerson Gilly, 39 years old, accused of murdering his pregnant wife by strangulation. He's a Texas citizen. And on the eve of his trial, he allegedly fled the state and is now in Italy. He landed in Milan. The authorities there, were ready for him when he was coming because the United States gave notice. And the United States made an extradition request of Italy to bring this man back. Okay, so what's interesting is Italy is right now putting the brakes on that. My understanding, and you can look up the reporting yourself, is that in Italy, the death penalty is not acceptable. Their view on it as a humanitarian issue is so strong that they're actually imposing that into the context of this extradition request, because the United States is saying, hey, can you send that dude back? He's supposed to be on trial for a double murder, strangulation of his pregnant wife, and he fled. So if you could send him back, please. And the Italian government is saying, well, if the death penalty is on the table, for us to send him back would be to participate in it. And we are that principally and ideologically opposed to the death penalty that we will not do that. And that's very interesting, because from a logical and rational, even an ethical perspective, I don't disagree with them. in terms of the decision that they're making. I'm not talking about beliefs about the death penalty. I don't think it's good, but you're not going to see me cry about it. You're not going to see me tie myself to a tree or super glue my hand to the concrete in order to stop the death penalty from being imposed. That's just not the way that I view it. It's not the way the Catholic Church views it, even though there are Catholics who try to say that it is. It's clear that the Catholic Church holds the same opinion that it always has, which is human life is sacred and people can be redeemed, they can repent. And so the death penalty has to be viewed in light of that. And there are greater prerogatives in the church than just killing people who are guilty of horrific crimes. Okay? So, and that's enough. That should satisfy that discussion and that debate. I understand that from a logical perspective, if you are vehemently and ideologically opposed to the death penalty, and another country is asking you to extradite one of its own citizens, you are looking at it and saying, well, if I extradite this person, if I send this person to you with the knowledge that you intend to potentially kill them through the use of capital punishment, which I'm ideologically opposed to, I become a participant in that, the administration of that, what you consider justice in your system, that we consider inhumane in ours. So that's the logic. I understand it. I'm not saying that it's sound or that it's perfect logic, because I don't think it really works quite like that. And I don't want to get into the philosophy and the logic of it. Just, it would be adequate for me just to point out that as a Catholic, you don't really view it in that way. Like participating in global or geopolitical rules and agreements as it relates to extradition requests is not necessarily participation in a judicial process that takes place on the other side. But I can see how the argument could go both ways. I'm just saying that I'm not really weighing in on that. I'm just talking about their beliefs and the manner in which, at least they're saying, right? Because these are politicians. So if I haven't said that enough already, I'll repeat it again now just so nobody gets carried away. This is what they're saying in Italy. This is what they're saying. Do I believe that whatever government officials or institutions in Italy, do they actually care? No, I'm not saying that at all. I have no clue. And if I was forced to guess or bet on it, I'm always going to put my money and my guesses on the side of no, politicians don't believe in anything. So whatever their motivations are, it could certainly just be political. They don't want they don't want the situation to be exploited by their political adversaries over there in Italy, who are going to just exploit the situation to say, oh, you participated in the death penalty. That kind of politicking. I'm just evaluating their justification, and since objectively speaking, the justification that they are offering as a matter of truth and logic and sound reasoning is reasonable. It's acceptable, and it couldn't just be dismissed. I'm not evaluating the people who are saying it, what their motivations are, or anything else. But it is interesting because you contrast that with what's going on here in the United States in some of the right-wing reactions to the extradition request from London, and all the ideology and the ideological warfare and the political warfare and the cultural warfare, the gender warfare, even the infighting within the GOP kind of warfare, because every single topic is coming up. And that's how these things work. Every single topic. And I just want to bookmark here really quick, because this aspect, this phenomenon that I'm going to discuss right now, as a package, I believe relates to something bigger, which I think is the real story that hardly got any attention at all. So I'm going to try to package this quickly without getting too deep into the sides. But it is clear that this has become political and far-reaching. There are people saying, oh, this is really a leftist, globalist war on the anti-white war, even though the Tates aren't really white. There are people saying like it's a Jewish-Muslim thing because the Tates are Muslim. There are people saying it's a gender war thing because the allegations are in the category of the MeToo allegations. There are people saying that it's political weakness because here's Trump taking outspoken, what would be considered allies of his who defended his administration and a lot of his conduct and things that he says, his dispositions, especially as it relates to the attacks from the left that Trump is like a sexist, misogynist, a rapist, and all of these things. So there are people that are saying that, and rightly observing that, like, wow, Trump is not stepping in to do anything for them at all. But look at what he did for Netanyahu when the UN found that he's guilty of war crimes or he's a war criminal. Or look at what he's done for Netanyahu to protect him from prosecution, even in his home country of Israel, based on the infighting that's going on back over there between their political parties. Look at the way he's protecting Epstein and the entire Epstein class. Look at the way he's misusing the government to protect himself. So that's all wrapped up in the allegations, certainly fair. But it's precisely that perfect storm where now this extradition request for the Tates has become a policy dispute, okay, a foreign policy dispute, an ideological dispute, because it's London and the US, it's the anti-white and white, anti-Christian Christian, Jew and Muslim, male and female, Republican and Democrat, misogyny and misandry, Me Too and Never Again. I mean, it's pretty much everything. There's almost nothing that's not there. So it makes for a perfect story. And it makes for a perfect package. It's certainly a budget-backed propaganda piece. And the veracity of the accusations are certainly questionable because, once again, these are now like what I understand to be 10 years old or more allegations, okay? And you see everything. You see everything in all of these different media personalities and these political pundits and political commentators. Everybody has something to say about this, and so the public discourse is getting filled up with it. But what I think is the most noticeable, and then I want to try to jump into this and then wrap up this episode. But what I see is this all happens big time, budget backed, perfect for everybody to get emotional and start fighting about on the same day that you wouldn't know unless Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie had posted on X about it themselves, that this resolution, the NDAA resolution, was, passed a vote, at Congress, right? So this is the National Defense Authorization Act. It's basically kind of like a rubber stamped thing. It just gets signed off on every year. It was originally instituted in 1961, and it dictates how military funding can be used. Sets priorities. Actual funding requires a separate appropriation legislation. So the key functions of the NDAA, which is this, again, the National Defense Authorization Act, is it sets a policy and operations. So, for example, it dictates guidelines for military activities, sets troop levels, authorizes weapons procurement, and that's the key because that's what we're going to be getting into, and mandates pay raises and benefits for service members. It's also like I said, it's a must-pass sort of bill. It's enacted every year since 1961, and it's frequently used as a vehicle to pass other non-defense policies, which is just like a form of pork barreling. It's like something that Congress does, which kind of shows you that your vote is just so much less powerful than you think, because there's the issue of you don't even know what they're really doing with the power. You would never know because of what they campaign on could be totally different. But even if you did know, you may not even understand the implications of what they're doing. And this is a perfect example of both, which is most people don't even realize what they just did, and still fewer would recognize the significance of it and the implications of it. And here's an example of that. In 2019, provisions that were included in the passage of that bill for that year, that annual NDAA, was restrictions on companies like Huawei, which is a Chinese company, Hikvision, looks like it's spelled like Hikvision, it's Hikvision, also a Chinese company. These are like technology, security, and hardware surveillance, okay? And Dawa, another company. So these are all Chinese companies that are in that space. And in 2019, they were banned, okay, pursuant to the expressed concerns that this was a national security matter, okay? So it was driven by fears that the Chinese government could exploit these telecommunications, technology, and surveillance equipment to conduct espionage or sabotage critical infrastructure in the United States, okay? And remember, this is the Chinese Communist Party, okay? So this is a communist country, global superpower, major competitor, and the United States is looking at these companies, these telecom, technology, surveillance, monitoring, security cameras, that kind of stuff. And we're saying that we need to pack into these provisions in the NDAA when it comes to funding, that these companies are banned because it creates vulnerabilities that could be exploited as part of espionage and spying, which is a precursor to warfare. It's even part of warfare, but a precursor to a hot warfare when we're not at war with China right now. So this was preemptive, okay? It says the U.S. government took several steps to enforce this restriction. So they had the network equipment ban, that was in 2019. U.S. legislation prevented rural telecommunication carriers from using federal subsidies to purchase Huawei networking equipment. And in 2022, the FCC officially banned the import and sale of new Huawei communications equipment. Okay, then they were put on the supply chain. That's the other key, supply chain blacklist. The U.S. Department of Commerce placed Huawei on the entity list in 2019. This prohibits American companies such as Google, Intel, Qualcomm from supplying Huawei with hardware, software, or technical services without a special license. Okay, so we could not supply them with anything either. And you're going to see why that's relevant. It's not just a matter of importing stuff from them, it's also we can't supply stuff for them. We're building on this, okay? So, and that was the same with, I don't need to get into them specifically, but with Dawa and Hikvision. All right, so now what Dawa's ban was due to the major national security risks. The U.S. agencies cited the company's ties to the Chinese government and vulnerabilities that could allow unauthorized surveillance, cyber attacks, and espionage. Additionally, the manufacturer faced international scrutiny for its role in supplying technology used for human rights abuses in Xinjiang, China, okay? Remember, we just talked about that mayor in Arcadia who admitted to being a Chinese spy, whose job it was, okay, to help shape public opinion and downplay human rights abuses. Just recently, right? She was just arrested. So now we got to sort of tie this in with what just happened yesterday, okay? And this has been building up for a couple of weeks. You might have seen little blurbs or little headlines about, oh, now the United States is joining its military with Israel, which just plays right into the allegations of we're fighting Israel's war for them. We attacked Iran for them. They've infiltrated and taken over the government. Their money basically owns huge swaths of politicians on both the political right and the political left. Then this counterattack of like, oh, you have this extreme anti-Semitism in the extreme right and the extreme left, and all of this fighting. But this was a real story that was surfacing over the last couple of weeks, and this vote took place yesterday for Section 219 for fiscal year 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. And what it did is it established the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, okay? The Technology Cooperation Initiative between the United States and Israel. What is it actually? Well, it directs, okay, this Section 219 for fiscal year 27 directs the Secretary of Defense to appoint an official to synchronize cooperative research, development, and supply chain integration in domains like missile defense, AI, and cybersecurity, okay? So the exact same regions that in 2019 and 2022 that the Congress passed these provisions in the NDAA about banning these Chinese companies from a communist country because of the vulnerabilities it would create, enabling China to exploit American security, to hack us, spy on us, and even identify potential weaknesses that they could exploit and destabilize our society, okay, through the use of like surveillance. And it also prevented American companies from providing certain services or products to China because they could take what we give them and start reverse engineering some of our own security apparatus, also for the purpose of subverting it or undermining it or being able to identify vulnerabilities which could be exploited in competition and or war, okay? So what this is the United States. Yesterday, it was passed in Congress, Section 219 for fiscal year 27, that is not simply a matter of what can we buy from Israel, what can we supply to Israel as it relates to these issues that have already been identified as pertaining to national security, but it directs the Secretary of Defense to appoint an official to synchronize cooperative research and development, supply chain integration in domains like missile defense, AI, and cybersecurity. So the Secretary of Defense is being directed to basically partner with Israel and synchronize these aspects of the American defense and security apparatus, including things like AI, missile defense, and cybersecurity. Okay? And this person is going to be like identified or designated as an executive agent. So it requires the Department of Defense to designate an official to accelerate bilateral defense tech integration and facilitate pathways from R&D into U.S. procurement. I don't know that you could become more tightly interwoven. I don't even know that there is any precedent in American history of such a thing, where we're going to another country and it's like we're going to fully integrate these aspects of our defense and security apparatus, when these aspects are on the cutting edge of what the future of war is expected to be like. AI, missile defense and cybersecurity. So that's unprecedented, to say the least. That's crazy. And people would be up in arms about it. I mean, well, it was just last week. Just last week, Donald Trump gave a prime time address saying that China had stolen election data, election demographics data, which could be used to manipulate public sentiment about issues, which could influence elections in the United States. And Trump rightly identified that as a threat to national security. And he was going to take action on it. And then all of these people came out and started saying the fact that the mainstream media, or the left, your liberal Democrats, the enemy of the Republican Party and the GOP, refused to cover this. Like, they wouldn't broadcast Trump's speech. And their justification for doing so was that it was reckless. And you had both sides accusing each other of treason, which is punishable by death in the U.S. Federal Criminal Code. So now that was last week. And now this week, Congress just passes this without a debate. So you wouldn't know unless someone told you. And in this case, you have Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're the ones who are talking about it. And you wouldn't even know about it if they didn't talk about it. And even after they talked about it, almost no one knows about it, because I saw these stories move through my timeline, and then that was it. Nothing else. Nothing else. Maybe a couple things here or there. But what did I see? What buried this? The perfect storm of everybody's fight. All your major identity groups. White guys and non-whites. Men and women. MeToo and never again. Democrat and Republican, false accusers and sex abusers, Jews and Muslims, London and the United States, the anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-male policies of leftist London, conflicts about what extradition requests should look like, party loyalty, with Trump not stepping in. You see what I'm saying? Like, the perfect storm of everybody's fight. I am struggling to think of a single issue or a single identity group as fostered and collated by the political class. I think we're going to have to divide this into two separate shows because it's gotten too long. So the first half, we're just focusing on what's going on with this whole Tate issue, Andrew and Triston, this peculiarly timed extradition request and peculiarly situated betrayal of the Trump administration from some of his own supporters, while he won't go after Epstein or anybody in the Epstein class, and the anti-white, anti-Christian London government somehow having no pushback from the, white, right, conservative Christian, supposedly Trump administration. Meanwhile, Italy has no problem saying, no, we're not going to extradite this guy for a capital crime, not even really, just because of our position on capital punishment. That's going to be part one. And part two is going to be about, look at how this happens at the same time that on a situation of global import pertaining to World War III and massive conflicts within the American government itself, intelligence agency against the White House, who's aligning with another country's intelligence agency, who's been identified as a threat and is surveying, and the Epstein, blackmail ring for congressmen. I mean, too good for a movie almost. And that's the second part. So divide these things into two. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Like, follow, share, thumb up, whatever you got. Spread this. I appreciate it. And peace out.